Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening. Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you are, welcome. Bienvenidos todos. Welcome to the present. It is with great joy that I welcome you to the international seminar, Orality, Sound and Archive. Damas y caballeros, sean ustedes bienvenidos. Bienvenidos al presente. Me da un gusto enorme darles la bienvenida al Seminario Internacional Oralidad, Sonido y Archivo. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ana Elena González Treviño, and I am the director of the Center for Mexican Studies, UNAM UK, an outpost of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, based at King's College, London. Soy Ana Elena González Treviño, directora del Centro de Estudios Mexicanos de la UNAM en el Reino Unido, una oficina de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, ubicada normalmente en King's College de la Universidad de Londres. Empiezo bilingüe, después me seguiré solamente en inglés. The mission of UNAM UK is to increase student mobility, academic exchange and collaboration to promote Mexican culture and the certification of Spanish as a second language. La misión de UNAM Reino Unido es incrementar la movilidad estudiantil, el intercambio y la colaboración académicos, promover la cultura mexicana y la certificación del español como lengua extranjera. The existence of offices such as UNAM UK attests to the unstoppable global tendency which dates back at least to the 15th century when Erasmus of Rotterdam embodied the ideal of the traveling scholar. And that is the internationalization of higher education. La existencia de oficinas tales como UNAM Reino Unido son la prueba de una tendencia global imparable que data al menos del siglo XV, cuando Erasmo de Rotterdam encarnó el ideal del erudito viajero, el ciudadano del mundo, y que es la internacionalización de la educación superior. Besides creating exchange opportunities for UNAM's academic community, such as summer English courses, which by the way are open to the general public, we establish and strengthen connections between Mexico and the United Kingdom. Some British universities are aiming already to make internationalization an integral part of students' experience, implying that every student and every academic should have at least one subject or one experience in a foreign university. Digital means such as these are making it possible to a wonderful extent. The classroom of the future, according to some, will be multinational and multilingual, taught jointly by international scholars. When I visited Mexico in January, I was happily conspiring with my dear friends and highly respected colleagues, Susana González Actorias and Mariana Macera, about their visit to the UK in order to hold this seminar at King's College London. As with every other academic and cultural visit, we had to postpone indefinitely due to the current pandemic. Reluctantly at first, we shifted online to reformulate the event as an online seminar. We have learned so much in the past few months. It has been like a crash course in digital logistics and in finding both technical and human compatibility for all we wanted to do with the highest possible standard. Our expressive and imaginative powers have been tested, and of course, we would not have been able to manage without our fantastic teams. Mateo, Amaury, Andres, Angelica, Annalise, Manolo, Christian, Eulalia, thank you heartily. But more than anybody, I would like to thank my dear friends and distinguished colleagues, Mariana and Susana, for taking the risk, for going outside your comfort zone, very far indeed from your comfort zone, because that is what internationalization is. It takes us out of our comfort zone into the unknown. And when we look again, we encounter a more generous and expansive version of ourselves. And this is why I wish to invite you, all of you who are present here today and who I thank as well, especially members of the UNAM community, but also everybody else, to visit us, to find out more about what we do and how we can help you. We had a wonderful response from people from many different places in Mexico, but also from Argentina, Chile, Brazil, the United States, Germany, Portugal, Spain, and of course, the United Kingdom. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not the future. It is the present. Welcome you to the present. A few technical indications before I leave the floor to my dear colleagues. Please keep your microphones turned off throughout the seminar. And if you wish to ask questions, please do so through the chat box. Mantengan sus micrófonos apagados y si desean hacer alguna pregunta, utilicen la herramienta del chat. Pudiera haber oportunidad de algunas preguntas en vivo, pero se les indicarán verbalmente, oralmente. Muchas gracias, sean todos bienvenidos. Qué felicidad ver a tantos conocidos y futuros amigos aquí reunidos, y cedo la palabra a Mariana y a Susana.
Muchas gracias, Ana Elena. Thank you, Ana Elena González. Muy buenos días a todos. Es un gusto verlos a todos, a tantos, gente conocida y querida, y a tantos que vamos a conocer y compartir. Thank you all to be today. And it is very nice to see you in this virtuality, in this present, as Ana Elena González said. Well, we would like to thank, firstly, to Ana Elena González Treviño and the Center for Mexican Studies, because for the enthusiasm with which she decided to support this encounter, which shows the importance of divulging humanities research at the university. Thank you very much indeed. Also, thanks to all the staff that is making this encounter possible, as you said, Ana, to Mateo, a Mauri, Andrés, Angélica, Cristian, Ana, Manolo, y Eulalia. Thank you very much, because without you, this is not possible. I'm going to speak in English, and then we say hello also in Spanish. Susana, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much, Ana Elena. Thank you all for being here. As Ana Elena already told you, this encounter was supposed to take place as a live event, but the coronavirus frustrated this twice. First in April, then when we decided to move the date to October, elusively thinking that the worst part of the pandemic would be over by now. However, we persisted, and thanks to technology, the types of mediated oral practices, such as webinars, online talks, and conferences, as the ones that we will have here, may actually give us the feeling of closeness, even in these challenging times. We consider it therefore a virtuous meeting on all ends. Thanks to you, colleagues, researchers, artists, students, and all participants who, by attending this seminar, are connecting and showing your interest to be part of this international dialogue. For us, it is a gathering we have been planning and looking forward to for a long time, as Ana Elena already told you. Let us then for a moment imagine ourselves in the hall of the Center for Mexican Studies in London, as we are sitting all together celebrating orality in all its shapes, forms, and contexts.
We briefly want to share with you that the idea of this encounter dates back, dates back to collaboration and exchange fundamentally between two groups and three repositories. The one coordinated by me on Impresos Populares Iberoamericanos that deal with the interaction between written and oral in multimodal popular prints, and Poética Sonora, coordinated by Susana González, which deals with contemporary oral practices related to expanded and experimental forms of poetry. The third repository belongs to the Ibero-American Institute that generally, through Ricarda Musser, helped to consolidate and create a well-grounded academic exchange of ideas and new projects. Last but not least, the Freie Universität joined in with activities discussing and researching on notation, orality, and archive. Orality, archive, and sound highlight our interest in discussing and ponder the many questions emerging from our own research experiences. How to approach and archive intermediate objects, how to catalog and preserve with new digital technology.
We are sure that through this interdisciplinary dialogue and collaborative work, we will all be enriched by the experiences of others, with valuable inputs to overcome challenges, solve doubts on the ways to deal with our respective archives. We therefore conceive these spaces as essential for reflecting on orality, prints, and documentation in their most various formats and ways of archiving. When it becomes mandatory planning the future with the aid of digital technologies, we have to think on what will remain of these oral traces, how, for whom, by which means, and what exactly are we archiving for with respect to a sustainable future. In this encounter, we not only want to continue our dialogue, but to extend it in the need for creating new networks where these discussions on the value of material objects and archives of oral practices share common preoccupations. As you have seen, this particular initiative grew and developed as a 3-day encounter divided into three 2-hour sessions, which will be fantastic because it allows us to have some more space for reflection between the panels. We hope you can join us in all the sessions.
So welcome to Ruth and welcome to the conference to everybody. Muy bienvenidos, comenzamos.
Perfecto. Quisiera hacer una pequeña aclaración. El evento está pensado para ser un evento bilingüe. Estaremos hablando en inglés y en español. La conferencia de la doctora Ruth Finnegan está en inglés. Estará disponible con subtítulos de manera parcial para esta ocasión y para consulta posterior ya estará completa en cuanto a subtítulos se refiere. Ella de todos modos es sumamente expresiva, creo que podrá comunicar muy bien sus ideas y entonces, bueno, pasemos a ver la conferencia de la doctora Ruth Finnegan.
Quizá nada más aclarar que son 2 videos consecutivos, nada más para que estén atentos. For this special occasion, Ruth has prepared a unique conference, partly recorded last Monday and partly yesterday, to avoid any technical inconveniences. And we have to confess, though, that our exchange with her began even some days before the recording took place, encouraged by the request she made that we should send her our personal questions. That is, the questions of our students, of our both of our groups, which she has splendidly, which she was able splendidly to weave in the video talk that we will see right now.
And well, you say, in addition, we are going to enjoy. So did you tell, well, in addition, we are going to enjoy a special performance that Ruth kindly has prepared for us, which includes reading texts from different traditions and times, from Homer to Matthew, Gospel, and from a Thomas Tyrne poems of the 17th century to a poem of her own, a voice and sound celebration. Let's see the video.
It is so wonderful all over the world, especially South America and Africa, so close to my heart. I want to talk about voice. Is it the supreme human quality? Voice, the supreme human quality? And let me tell you, it has been so helpful having all your pre-questions and comments, because that is what helped to inform this whole talk. I'm not answering them all directly, I guess, but they are running through and inspiring everything I say. Well now, voice. I want to talk rather switch the terms to say audition, that is hearing and making a sound. Now, audition is the first and the last sense of human beings. We hear, we now know, in the womb. Hear and touch, the two are very closely allied, you may not realize. And it is the last thing we feel as we are dying, we know that. Just think, hearing, the sense of hearing, it's of sound, it's everywhere. In nature, look around, natural and creatures, it's in our body. Think of heartbeats, of breath, of the rhythms. And it's been there from the beginning right up to now. It's not true that sound is a thing that is emphasized in so-called primitive times, and that now it's all vision. We're very audio conscious now, video too, but very audio, sound. But the supreme human quality, no, sound runs right through the animal world as well. If you think of terrestrial earth vertebrates, land vertebrates, and insects, they all have ears of one kind or another. We hear through vibration, through striking, through clapping, through playing. We hear using our breath and our vocal cords. Birds too, though rather than our kind of vocal cords, they have something called a syrinx, but they perform, they use sound very much as humans do, each with their own characteristic melody that they compose themselves, amazing. Or marine animals like whales or dolphins, they use the pressures, air pressures, to communicate across hundreds, thousands of miles. Or bats, they communicate through ultrasonic sound, in other words, sound we can't hear. And remember, you have to hear sound. And in that sense, I've always thought that the word orality is a bit limited, because it seems to be mainly thought of as us speaking. We need to hear as well. Now, human ears cannot hear the full range of sounds that other animals can at the top or the bottom, but we do hear a lot. But for that reason, sound is often supplemented by the other senses. Just think of speaking. We use sight as well. Have you noticed how face masks mask our ability to lip read? So audition with vision is a pretty topical thing at the moment. In other words, I want to emphasize to you, to myself, I had to learn this, that voice and speech is a multimodal sense. We have to see, sometimes have touch as well, a visual setting, an audience, a group, to make speech sensible. And it's not just language, so-called, that's used, language in the sense of the words that come in dictionaries. We're very dominated by our iconic paradigm of writing, aren't we? Or the written word, and especially the printed word. But we also use things like laughter, silence, modulations of the voice like loud, soft, fast, slow, lengthening. I learned so much from my fieldwork among a people called the Limba, who I learned so much from the dynamics and the multimodal mode of storytelling. Like, there's an ordinary word, piri piri, which means all night. But in a story, just think, piri 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 piri. Or Mandy means a lot, but Mandy. Mandy means, well, you can guess, a huge lot. So as well as the face, gestures, movements, lengthening, loud, soft, sweet, bitter, dramatic, calling for the audience. Besides this, there are also some set modes to help us to be multimodal, particularly the famous African idiophones. That is, words that mean, that somehow convey sound in a little word, like ntiri means the flashing on a screen. Can you see that? Flash, flash, flash. And it's often said that we in English don't have idiophones, but actually think of something like whoops or wow. In a way, they don't have dictionary meanings, and yet they are very effective sound. They give quite an impression. Another thing, in Africa, you have tonal, well, all languages are tonal, but some are more tonal in a cognitive sense than others. And one of the great African forms is tone riddles, where it's not the cognitive meaning that gives the answer to the riddle, but a phrase which has the same tonal up and down or whatever as the question. Very, very clever. And in many languages, particularly South American, maybe some of you know about that, sound symbolism is really part of the sense. In fact, human use of multimodal context sound is highly sophisticated, and I guess always has been. It comes in music, which is so close to spoken. In fact, that it's really just a continuum. And in speech, and it does depend a bit what you mean by language, as I say, not just dictionary words as written, but also the sound, the connotations, the implications, and then the other senses that come in, multimodal. And that again is something that I found so much in fieldwork from, I say it's not true, from limber storytelling, which is a performed art. That was my main learning, my main finding. And indeed, it comes in any, well, you will know yourselves. Think of when you even read aloud, which is a kind of performance, or aloud with your inner ear when you're reading to yourself. For example, every now and then I do a reading in church, and sometimes I think, oh, this is really a very boring reading, isn't it? And then I get up, and with the audience, and with the moment of performance, of delivery, it grows, it glows. It is multimodal, though I had never thought it before. And ever since that particular reading, sometimes it grows into a poem by me, though I won't talk about that now. It's changed because it is performed. And that, of course, is the true way in which it was originally handed down, delivered, transmitted orally. But the interesting, and in a way rather sad thing, is that voice, sound, the oral, is often ignored or downgraded. It's there, but below the level of our consciousness, particularly among the Western literate elite. We talk about modernity. We still use this evolution stereotype, and we think that oral is something in the past. It comes a lot in colonial and decolonial, post-colonial studies. We think back to the schools that there were in the colonies, well, here too, where the emphasis was on learning writing, on the written word, not the local languages. And that's something that happens now too. What are called home languages, though all languages are home really, are just brushed aside as if they don't matter. But I was fortunate, well, we were all fortunate in the decolonization process in the late 60s, 1970s, which is when my book, Oral Literature in Africa, came out. Because up to then, African studies was something, a bit exotic, a bit on the side, not part of literature or history. But with decolonization, all the universities that were burgeoning over Africa wanted to have something to do with African studies, with their own local things, and local products collected and transmitted and performed by local people. And so archives and libraries and collections were growing up, including tapes or later cassettes and digital. It was a revelation by ordinary local people. And in fact, you might say that the different stages of media were leapfrogged, like moving to film straight away from the oral, unwritten. Like, did you know where the most films were made in the world at the moment? Mainly India, third, United States, but second, Nigeria. And in fact, I'm just having a film made there in Nigeria, which maybe you'll see sometime. So text is performance, not just static written page. And we now know, this was a good point made in one of the comments, that we decide on a genre, not just from its textual content, but also from its performance features. That was a good question. And this is true in nowadays time everywhere. But it's taken some time. When I was working and writing a thesis in the 1960s about storytelling, it was never thought of that I would include tapes, let alone video, whereas now it is mainly accepted that a PhD that is something to do with oral text would include audio or video, or nowadays it's really easier just to include a link to the audio video. And I think this change is partly because of changes in technological opportunities, but also partly just our preconceptions, the changes in our culture. Yeah, that's a good point, because of the new opportunities. Well, of course, we still want written archives and libraries, because the interesting thing is that they last over time. Oh, if not burned, I think of you, Brazil. Our hearts burn for you. They're sore. But libraries are good, though they every now and then think of Alexandria over the years, Byzantium. If they're not burned, sometimes on purpose, isn't that awful? But they do last, and paper lasts, and vellum, papyrus. But now we have digital collections too, and that is really, really good. But that too has disadvantages, because it doesn't really, as you say, last over time in the same way. It dates, the technology is dated, and people no longer can read it. So we need both forms of archives, of collections. Now, how did I get focused, obsessed in this way about sound and the oral? Well, I was already sort of aware of it without realizing, because I grew up in Ireland and in Ulster, where there was a great feeling of the beauty of verbal wit, performance. I think of my mother's storytelling, which really has informed everything I've written. Or my father's wit. He was a very quiet gentleman, but he did have one performance piece. Am I allowed to tell it? He used to tell us when we were children, a limerick. I sat next the Duchess at tea. It was as I thought it would be. Her rumblings abdominal were something phenomenal. And everyone thought it was me. But I didn't really realize the importance of these speech rhythms and cadences and gestures that were inbuilt in me until a little bit later. The next thing that happened was that when I went to Oxford to study the ancient world, classics, classical literature, which I then realized was always published by being read aloud. We had to study all these texts that had been transmitted over the 10th centuries in writing, but I hadn't realized that they were actually oral. This overlap, this continuum between oral and written. And it was something that I very much had learned from my fieldwork and speech storytelling. I also learned it interestingly. I went to a wonderful lecture about Catullus by a very...
Sí, gracias. Vamos a hacer una pequeña pausa para, por favor, volver a cargar el video y poder tener acceso a más subtítulos. Estamos haciendo realmente esfuerzos grandes. Gracias.
Oral and written. And it was something that I very much had learned from my fieldwork and speech storytelling. I also learned it interestingly. I went to a wonderful lecture about Catullus by a very, very learned, internationally famous, dry, I thought, Teutonic authority called Frenkel. And he went through a Catullus poem, the text, the language, the grammar, the structure, the transmission, the cruxes, they call them, when you're not sure what it said. But then he said, stop. Let me read it. It is, after all, a love poem. And he read it, and it was, Dami, Milia, Basia, give me 1,000 kisses, then more than 100 more. And we all went silent. And again, he used to sing to us from the Sanctus in the B minor Mass. Sanctus, etc. He was a bass. And that again brought home to us sound from this dry Teutonic grammarian. At that time, people hadn't yet realized that Homer was probably orally composed and initially transmitted. And we still read it aloud because Lord's wonderful Singer of Tales hadn't yet been published, though people had just heard of Milman Parry. But I was told by my, that also rather dry, grammar-inclined tutor, Ruth, you must read all your texts aloud. And the number of texts we had to study, I can't tell you. So I was a little young, also puritanical girl. I thought you had to do what your tutor told me. Nobody else did. And I read them all aloud, including the prose. And it gave me a real insight. It also helped in my exams because I went through and I translated and looked at the grammar, all that stuff. And then I read it aloud. So I remembered it 3 times as well. So how did this lead me into oral poetry? Well, I had published in 1970 Oral Literature in Africa, in which I was very much emphasizing the continuity between oral and written, going through medieval times, ancient times, and so on. And then that was by the Oxford University Press, then, one of the top ones. But then someone from the other top one, Cambridge University Press, came to see me. And I remember that moment sitting at my desk. And she said, would you think of doing a shortened version of that, but widening to include Homer and other world epics and literature? So I said, I sound a bit large. I'll think about it. And I did think about it. And I thought that would be too wide, but maybe, and this was one of your questions, if I limit it to oral poetry. And that's how my interest in oral poetry began. A series of accidents, like, well, we know so often. And as I wrote it, I became more and more aware of the overlap and interaction and continuum between oral and written literature in the ancient world, in Africa and medieval times. And now, I mean, think of, we know that, say, Shakespeare lyrics, which are written down, are actually sung. Lyric from the lyre, Greek lyre, or think of pop lyrics, they're poems. And that was one of my big revelations to myself when I studied oral literature in Africa, that these songs were poems if you looked at the lyrics. So that was also blinkered because they really, in their full revelation of reality, they need to be sung. So I became more and more aware of the oral poetry all around us, the oral sung poetry all around us, and thought a lot about what poetry was as well. Repetition, perhaps, cadence, sound. And more recently, I've also realized that a poem really is an intrinsic gem in itself, as well as in this context in itself. And there has to be a thought there. But let me go back to capturing sound. That is so significant. Think back, it may sound very irrelevant, to the revelations of the microscope, some say, centuries ago, of MRI now. We're seeing new aspects of reality, and we are realizing that these things are real. Now being able to hear and to capture sound gives us a new view of reality, which now is getting built into our culture, as you say. We realize that sound is something that exists and has reality, which in the past, when we couldn't capture it for study, people didn't really realize. And that's why I would say that Albert Lord's Singer of Tales, I'll send that reference somewhere, really was a revolution in scholarship, because he found a way of old style technology, but still there, of archiving and capturing sound so you could study all these different changing versions. And it means that we can now capture sound not in just one device or putting it in one physical place, but now digitally reaching worldwide through the internet, through social media, good point. And now, of course, with digital, we can include the visual, widening our concept of the reality of sound, of the oral, through video. Place, but now digitally reaching worldwide through the internet, through social media, good point. And now, of course, with digital, we can include the visual, widening our concept of the reality of sound, of the oral, through video, YouTube, social media. And furthermore, they can be collected and transmitted and kept not just by professional scholars, as in the past, but by what are called amateurs, by everyone. And sound, we now realize, this again is a bit of a revolution. It's not just something produced by them, by the exotics, but by everyone, by all of us, by you, by me. And we're not just collecting something that's already there, but we're creating and creatively storing it. And this also is helped by the revolution in publishing. something produced by them, by the exotics, but by everyone, by all of us, by you, by me. And we're not just collecting something that's already there, but we're creating and creatively storing it. And this also is helped by the revolution in publishing, brought by self-publishing and print on demand, POD. So anyone, everywhere can, for very little money, publish their books, including audiobooks, which are now maybe the most fast-growing form of books on the publication circuit. And there are broadcasts, radio and television and recorded, storytelling, broadcast, interviews, autobiographies, which now have become something really important and significant within anthropology. They began with social autobiographies recorded, say, in Africa, but now all of us have our own stories repeated. I suppose McLuhan, who I don't agree with, but was really a wonderful, insightful scholar, might have called a new revolution, oral, writing, digital. So we also, besides full audiobooks, we've become, I would say, more awareness of the sonic nature of ordinary written books. Like all my novels, well, everything I write, I hear when I write it, and I try to make the cadences right for someone who would read aloud. So written work too is meant to be read and kind of read aloud. And within the written work, there are intensely extra oral bit with their own marks or settings or ends of the lines as oral. So even writing is a kind of sonic work, kind of performance. And it's not, again, an opposition between oral and written. It's a continuum, a multiform practice. As one commentator said so well, multiple ways of inscription as a practice. Images, audio, video, text of many kinds, because writing takes many different forms. There is the phonographic, which is our typical way of using the either the Arabic or the Roman alphabetic way, but also semasiographic, which is the fine word for pictograph writing, in which is not the sound, but the things, the meanings that are transmitted. And don't forget, this is all part of our cultural heritage, informed by memory. Did you know, I only recently remembered that mnemosyne, the Greek word for memory, was the mother of the muses, of all the arts. And in the ancient world, they weren't worried about plagiarism. They want to emulate, to repeat, to do the best as ancient text writers do. So memory in some ways is our key. Memory through archives, through images, through texts, through our minds. I used to be very skeptical about Jung's idea of the collective unconscious that folklorists kept pushing at me. Now I think there is, do you? Something really deep there, the collective unconscious. I should have said earlier that this discovery of capturing sound goes back further than we might think. I know we became very aware of it through the Singer of Tales, Albert Lord, but technologically it goes back, I would say, well, I mean, there was drum language and there was memories of psalms and hymns. Do you remember? Have you noticed that in hymn books, often the tune isn't put down, sometimes it does, because we remember tunes, music, but we don't remember the words. That's why we need the words in books. So sound has always gone across time through our memory, but in technological capturing terms, it really, I would say, goes back to the telephone. Well, the telegraph before that, which is sound, Morse code, tap, 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 tap. But the telephone bell, the first interchange was 1875. And there, interesting, they didn't think of it as a way of communicating between two people, but as a kind of broadcast radio. And now we've got back to that again. In the internet, global world, and really the effect of global world first relied on sound, radio, like the transatlantic cable and then the trans-Pacific cable on sound. So in some ways, you would say hearing and audition is more basic than anything else. And it's also so capturable. It really quite amuses me to think that I recorded my limba storytelling and then wrote them down as a good classical scholar in written text, so that my PhD was 3 volumes. They were so heavy because I had to put in 3 copies of all of them. When I recorded them, I was unusual in the 1960s in taking a tape recorder, sort of, well, it was carryable, transportable, and it had these tiny little tapes which got wound round on my neck and everything, but it worked. And I just shoved them away, didn't record, didn't document them properly in an old shopping bag. And 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4, somebody said, how about digitizing them? So I said, oh, no, 1961, 63, never be. But they did. They digitized them. Was that not a miracle? And they're now available on the web. So coming back to my question, is voice the supreme human quality? Well, that's still a bit controversial, just to end up. Maybe no, because, well, it is a bit controversial. I mean, many people would say that language is the central thing, especially writing and print, not sound. That kind of is in the past. And that language, alphabetic language, or colonizing language, is the highest pinnacle, Western writing. I actually disagree, but it is a very, very strong view, which I've criticized in my Where is Language and other places. But yes, in a way, I would say that sound is the supreme human quality. I'm just coming to the end now. It's our first and last sense, human sense. Literature that is based on sound, song, ritual, human communion. Think of the communion of choirs together, of people speaking, conversing together. Phonographic writing like ours is based on sound. Poetry is essentially, if nothing else, essentially sonic. Music, that word, did you know, musicae, those in ancient world and the word used in medieval times, literally means sung words, musicalized words. And voice is one of our strongest metaphors or images, the voice. And it's not just human because of birds. So maybe with some limitations and qualifications, I would say that yes, ultimately, sound is the essential, greatest human quality. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very happy to have comments and questions, and thank you already for what you you've said. So hello, and for the moment, farewell, but back with you soon. There we are.
So now we're going to see the next video with some performative examples by Ruth Finnegan. But please feel free to share your comments through the chat right now while we are hearing the second part. And since we know that we might become short in time for addressing all the inquiries, we will gather the ones that we will not be able to include here and send them to Ruth, hoping that the dialogue will continue beyond this limited session. Thank you, Ruth, again for these marvelous words. And let's continue with the next part, please.
Right. Now we're coming to a bit of performance. You know that I've said that the voice has to be decorated multimodally by gestures, face, and all that's below the level of our consciousness, really, though it's very effective. But there are also some deliberate gestures when you perform, when you use your voice to create a sacred liminal space. Sometimes there are accoutrements. Well, I can't manage the orator's staff. I can't manage the lyre, oh, the Greek lyre, but I can manage this. So now I am the performer. We are all moved into the special space, audience, viewers, listeners, performers, speakers. Let me begin with the first two lines of that wonderful Homer epic, the start of so much, the Iliad. It begins by saying, Goddess, sing, sing, sing of the wrath, the anger of swift-footed Achilles, the son of Peleus, the wrath that was destructive and killed, brought grief to so many of his companions. Listen to the hexameter, the sixth beat. Menina aidetheia, peleiridio Achilleos, ulomanen, destructive. E muriachaios alge atheke. Do you hear the hexameter line? That again, as one of you said rightly, helped to set the genre. And all those who wrote in Greek and Latin afterwards, they used the hexameter as a signal that this is an epic. They didn't need to say, they didn't even need to say goddess, like the beginning of the Aeneid, arma virumque cano. I sing of arms and the man, and everyone knew it was a hexameter, everyone knew it was an epic. So this is really the beautiful beginning of so much. Well, it was a way back before that, but I think of it as the beginning of so much beautiful literature. Well, so much for that. Let me now move still in my special attire, like actors are, you know. Actors have special costumes. The Greeks had masks, which in a way made the characters universal, moving them again into that special liminal ether space. But let me move on. The voice, it's one language really, the voice at any one time, except any language has so much mixture of other languages from way back, centuries back. Language is so wonderful. It's not everything, but it is so full of complexity and antiquity and meaning. And of course, the voice carries, well, we know it's global and always has been. The voice, it's such a good metaphor, voice of many cultures, brought from not just the past, from right across, from you, all the cultures that you are contributing dear listeners, dear students. Let me now read, and there'll be a bit to follow as well. And I'm afraid this is going to be in English, not in Greek, because we understand English between us, don't we, communicating. It comes from the first chapter of Mark's Gospel, and it was the first of Christ's miracles, and it talks about how he was recognized. So listen, it goes on from about verse 21. It's quite short. When the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" "Oh, I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The first miracle, the first preaching. And I always thought it was such a dull reading and just skipped over it, because Mark always is very matter of fact, not the sort of wonderful insight, inspiration of, say, John, or looking to the doctors, the healing of Luke. But when I read it, as I say, it just somehow grew and glowed, and I now love it. And do you know what? It turned into a poem. And you know, when you have a poem, that somehow, whether it's marked out on a page or spoken or just thought in the mind, it moves you into that in-between special space of altered consciousness. That's a term, altered consciousness, is now quite coming in, and it's pretty relevant to voice. It grew into a poem when I was thinking about it. So will you mind one of my poems? I guess you write poems too, so do send them in. We'll try, maybe Mariana can set up a blog for your poems. Listen, it's the evil spirit speaking, and I picture that evil spirit going around shrieking around the edge of the universe, and yet remembering that one moment when it was in touch with the Son of God, because that evil spirit was the first to recognize Christ. Would you believe it? Gives us hope, gives us all hope, doesn't it? How awful, how terrible we are. So the evil spirit is speaking. "I am dust splattered on the road, no love, no worth, alone. But you looked and saw eternity in me and made me precious too. I am the note that grated harsh, the one that no man loved. You heard my voice. You made it sweet and true and lyrical. I am the grit was born of sin and boringdom. You looked and loved my worthlessness and saw the pearl that grew within. I am the flotsam and jetsam scattered on the sea, thrown away. You made of me a miracle. And oh, I am the evil spirit, the one that shrieked and fled. You gave to me to recognize the very first, you, the Son of God." Because it's a poem, I find it very moving. And in a way, a poem speaks of itself through the voice of somehow universalness of eternity that is only in a poem you can get. Now, the third of the performances from wonderful Traherne, Mariana can tell you more about him, 17th century, is that right? Now, it looks like prose, but it brought home to me very much thinking of oral poetry and following on from that just as there is a continuity and no opposition between oral and written literature, so there is no real opposition between poetry and prose. In fact, it used to be all poetry, and there's a very good book called The Invention of Prose. It really came later, partly with print, where you set out poetry, what's called poetry, separately from prose, you know, jagged right-hand side and so on. But this is from Thomas Traherne's beautiful 3rd century Meditation 3. Let me read it. The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. The dust and stones of the street were as precious as gold. The gates were at first the end of the world. Can't you hear the poetic lines? The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things. The men, what venerable and reverent creatures did the aged seem, immortal cherubim, and young men, glittering and sparkling angels, and maids, strange seraphic pieces of life and beauty. Boys and girls tumbling in the street and playing were moving jewels. I knew not that they were born or should die, but all things abided eternally as they were in their proper places. Eternity was manifest in the light of the day, and something infinite behind everything appeared, which talked with my expectation and moved my desire. The day seemed to stand in Eden, or the city seemed to stand in Eden, or to be built in heaven. The streets were mine, the temple was mine, the people were mine, their clothes and gold and silver were mine, as much as their sparkling eyes, fair skins and ruddy faces. Oh, the skies were mine, and so were the sun and moon and stars, and all the world was mine, and I the only spectator and enjoyer of it. I knew no churlish proprieties, no bounds, no divisions, but all proprieties and divisions were mine, all treasures and the possessors of them. So with much ado, I was corrupted and made to learn the dirty devices of this world, which now I unlearn and become, as it were, a little child again, that I may enter into the kingdom of God. Poetry and the voice, and so beautiful. It's our joint inheritance from all over the world. Thank you for being with me. What is performance without an audience? So that's it for today. Blessings.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You can clap. Thank you very much for this splendid conference, dear Ruth. When considering orality, we immediately think in Ruth Finnegan, whose work paved the way and detonate new approaches to orality over the world. Her studies about African oral poetry and later oral poetry with a comparatist perspective have been crucial in many disciplines. The voice and sound of many traditions, poems sung in multimodal performances. Her books have become part of our life as students, as teachers, and as researchers. We are delighted to have her, to have you, Ruth, with us today. We could say that it's a dream come true and it is an honor for us to have you inaugurating this seminar with your master talk on voice, the supreme human quality.
So let us start with the panel of questions. We have about 50 minutes before the session closes. So thank you again, Ruth, for this splendid conference. And it has encouraged already some of, among the audience, a couple of questions. We're going to gather them, give some of the people who are asking the voice, and others we're going to try to compact the questions in one single thing. Let us start by saying that you have masterfully presented so many aspects regarding voice, offering thereby convincing arguments for believing that voice might actually be considered a supreme human quality. But isn't it paradoxical that on the other hand, we have experienced orality and sound as downgraded values in our times, as you have said? It appears that we tend to lose the balance and forget about this importance. How can sound documents, inscriptions, and archives help reestablish our perspective? What do you think, Ruth? Is she there? I hope so. She was. Let me check. Can somebody help us to check on her microphone, maybe?
Ruth, if possible, can you unmute your microphone? Remember, on the left-hand side, below.
Mute. Is
Yeah.
that better?
Great. Yeah. Now we hear you.
Right. Downgrading sound. Oh, but let me first say that voice can be used for self-expression, but it's also essentially for communication. So where would I be without all of you? Thank you. So many of you there, it's a miracle. Well, downgraded. I think one of the reasons is that from a way, way back, we could capture the visual, and therefore we knew it existed. But because we couldn't capture and record and kind of meditate on sound, we somehow thought it didn't really exist. And the visual, think way back to cave paintings. Maybe that was a kind of pictographic writing, picture writing. And then the cuneiform of the Sumerians and the Mesopotamia, and inscriptions, which you get in the north of Africa too, but are way, way back. And then all the different forms of writing and of pictures. We are so aware of the visual because it can be, well, archived and captured. And I think that's why it's only fairly recently that sound and voice that we've known about forever, we've always known about, there have always been singers. I think they were at the beginning. I think music was the first art, really, even before, if you can separate it from language, away from the beginning. And I think it's just, we have only become consciously aware of it in the last couple of century and a half. Does that begin to answer the question?
Yes, yes.
A very big one.
Definitely. We have another question here by Jorge Pacheco. I want to open up the microphone. Is it possible? I lost him now. Is it possible that somebody can help us to open up the microphone so that he can ask? He has a very concrete question.
Let me just say that my ears aren't wonderful, so if I don't quite hear it, it's not the fault of your voice, and the organizers can translate and help. And I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish.
Okay.
Beautiful language.
Okay, I think I'm here. Yes?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. I was only going to ask, to what extent can we say that the voice between inverted commas, that sounds again between inverted commas, in our head when we practice silent reading is a form of orality? Let me repeat the question, sorry. To what extent can we say that the voice that sounds in our head when we practice silent reading is a form of orality? Thank you. I don't know if you could hear me.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Very good question. Very, very basic. I think the quick answer is yes, maybe in a secondary kind of way. When we're listening to someone, we hear that someone in our heads, in our minds, through our ears, as well as through the sound waves going through. I think when we write something, we hear it. And you know, for many, many centuries, people didn't read silently, they read aloud. It was a completely different new idea to read silently. But then gradually, it became more just mumbling, or monks in their own cells would read silently, but it still carried over the idea that when you read, there was sound there and breath there. And that's what punctuation is, after all. People nowadays think that it's grammar, it's, you know, punctuation, a written thing. But actually, originally, a full stop and a comma were to show where you made pauses or where you took breath. So it was very much a device, a signal for audition. So I would say very much yes. But please tell me, sir, what do you think? What is your answer?
I was thinking if this actually kind of expands the notion of orality. I mean, we normally think that it's only emission, no? Orality would be the emission of air through, I don't know, through the mouth, no? But
Good
perhaps, sorry?
Yes, good point.
Yes, sorry.
But could you both put up your camera so that we can see you? It might be nicer to have a multimodal, as Ruth said.
Oh, good, great. I saw you.
Dialogue.
Nice hair.
Thank you. So sorry, I forgot completely about the camera, sorry.
Lovely, hello.
Could you also put up, open up your video, Ruth?
Okay.
It is next to the, yeah, great, super.
Okay. Thank you.
I look better when I smile. Not so old.
Yes, sorry, I was saying, perhaps this expands the notion of orality just as emission of air through the mouth, or I don't know, to some other form of thinking. I don't know, perhaps like a form of electricity in the mind.
Yeah.
If we're not emitting air, perhaps it's something. It could be another physical factor in the mind, not the soul, let's say, but perhaps electricity, or I don't know how to think of this.
Yeah, good point. Though I think your metaphor, no, your actual meaning of breath is really the central one. And again, breath, it's lovely. Psyche, the Greek word psyche, which also means a butterfly, so many butterflies on tombs, or the soul also means the breath or life or the life's journey. So again, that is bringing us back to voice, isn't it? So you are so right, I think. Where do you come from?
From Mexico City, well, UNAM. Yes.
Hello, welcome then.
Thank you, Ruth.
Jorge is part of our Poética Sonora group. There are many more questions. Let us move on to the next one. Sarmen Almond made also a question. Could you please turn on your microphone, Sarmen, and keep it short and articulated, please? Carmen, Alma?
Ears are important too.
Or maybe someone can help us to open up her microphone? Carmen.
Hello, I see you.
Perfecto. Hello.
Lovely smile. Yay.
Thank you. How are you? Thank you very much for this conference, for the video. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you to everybody. I will try to be brief. I wrote it, but now I lost it again. I was thinking, what are your thoughts about if you think that until what extent the voice can express the unconscious of that person who emits the sound through speaking, but also when this person utters sound without words?
Yes, or vision without words, your smile when you began. Yes, I think there is, I know humans are very essentially visual creatures, unlike some other animals. We are animals, but there is something that links to the deep unconsciousness. I think you're absolutely right. And to the liminal, which is a word I love, the sort of in-between, when you're neither asleep nor awake and yet you're both. That's where my novels come from. Amazingly, I never thought I would write novels, but now I am very inspired by Homer, who was so sonic. So, I mean, I don't know how you would ever prove it, but I would agree with you. And again, I think this brings us back to Gustav Jung and the collective unconscious. I hadn't thought before, thank you. I think the collective unconscious is probably sonic. But maybe some people are more, I think all people are auditory, but some are more, I mean, I think I'm quite an auditory person rather than visual, whereas some of my best friends are more visual. They relate to pictures. Oh, and another thing that this brings me back to, it's now come back into fashion again after being rightly debunked for being rather artificial as it was in the past, the difference between the right and the left hemispheres of the brain. That the left hemisphere, which relates to our right hands, we're mostly right-handed, is very much something of the modern West. It's to do with being scientific, logical, systematic, picking things out into little bits and looking at them separately. Very much part of Western science. I'm not debunking it. But then the right hemisphere is the hemisphere of sound, of a holistic vision. And I personally, do you mind me saying something quite personal? I had about 8 or 9 years ago, I had what was possibly a series of little mini strokes. And they found out from sonic, whatever it was, sound wave things, that it was on the language area of my brain on the left side. And it wasn't a huge stroke, but I then went on to read the people who've had a real stroke in their left side, bless it as the most wonderful liberating thing, because it meant that their right side, their imaginative linking deep into the unconscious side, could flourish for the first time. And it was then, after the series of mini strokes, that I had a new experience of language, that language was sonic and deep and not just for scientifically describing things, which I still do. I'm still quite good at. So your question, it leads into a lot of things that I hadn't thought of at first. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, completely. Thank you. I was just thinking that in psychoanalysis, for example, now that you mentioned Carl Jung, well, the main material for the work is the voice of that who goes to the of the patient, and through the voice, the other one listens and also answers, and it's the therapy through communication. But it's not only about what is said; it's about how it is said. Yes. What is behind the words. But yeah, Many things. Thank you very much.
Yes, the connotations are really as important as the cognitive meaning. And you know, language is so wonderful. Communication, the voice is con, with communicating. But I also, have you ever thought, I only realized a couple of years ago, but maybe you were before me, that that word consciousness, which has become a very fashionable word, it is actually literally together, con, shias, which is from science, knowing together. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Very deep.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, when thinking in orality, mostly we thought, as you pointed out, only oral and not in multimodal dynamics, as you remark, involved in storytelling and poems. Repetitions and words cadence creates a much complex text. And Mercedes Zavala asked, and I asked, how do you think we should register these texts to understand their sonic nature better or make a better listening of them? Do you think transcription is a good idea, or what do you think about that when you transcript oral text to written text?
It's a real issue that I struggled with, because people used to think that just, well, now there's the software that does it, that transcribing from the oral to the written was just a simple technical thing. But I've actually written a whole chapter about the different issues you have to cope with while doing it. It's not, I mean, well, we know translation is a complex thing. There's no right way of doing it, though there are wrong ways of doing it. There are so many different ways of doing it, and it depends what you think of the original recording as well and how that was done. I mean, in the past, I'm sorry to keep coming back to African ones, but that's what I know about best. They were put together and bound up in a book, you know, the tribal traditions from way back of the bongo bongo or the ping pongs or something, and put down in really dull-looking small font print, probably justified. But actually, I learned a lot from someone who'd written about, I think it was Native American, Tedlock, in which he pointed out, or Himes, rather, Del Himes, a wonderful American sociolinguist anthropologist, which he pointed out that all these, we now call them Native American, not American Indian or Red Indian, folk tales, so-called, that were set down as prose, were actually poetry, if you looked at them, because they all were like in that Traherne reading. They all, if you performed them aloud with your voice in sound, had lines in them. And that gave me a quite new idea about Africans' tales, including, you'll think this is funny, I learned in Japan to look at things differently, because I went to a conference in Japan on music, and there was somebody who had done field work among another people, not very far away from the Limba people I'd studied, but in a different country, completely different language group. And he played me some recordings of stories he'd done. And they could have been Limba stories. The cadences at the end were exactly the same. And I realized that because I didn't understand the language, the cognitive meaning, I was able to listen to the sound. So I think cognitive meaning and the written word, just like when I put a page in front of my face by mistake, gets in the way of us hearing the true sonic nature. So for the first time, I listened to my recordings of Limba stories as if I didn't understand the words, and they gave me quite a different impression. So I think transcription ought to be given the same amount of attention theoretically as translation is, because it is, transforming from one mode to another mode. And we need to do it. I mean, it's a helpful thing because it helps us to look at certain linguistic factors, which are also interesting. But it is complex. And as you say, it has many issues. Oh, life is wonderful, full of complexities, isn't it? And students.
Thank you very much.
I tell you what, students are there for us to learn from, as you have noticed.
Regarding what you have just said, Mariana Ferreira had the question as to where she can find these recordings, the ones that you digitalized. Could you tell us something about that?
Yes, they're not very well documented because I didn't link them to the translations properly. But again, you can listen to the sound. There is a wonderful archive called, now I think it's the World of Oral Literature, shared by Cambridge and Yale. I think if you find it, World Oral Literature. And it began as people who felt that oral literature was, or orality was disappearing over the world. They wanted to capture it. I mean, I think that was a mistake, but it was a good thing really, because it meant that they did archive these. And in fact, if any of you have archives or sonic recordings, do deposit them there, because you will find them there. And it is also, if you look up my Oral Literature in Africa book, published by the Open Book Cambridge publishers, there is a link on the page for that there to that archive. But do add to it, because we're all into archives. You are, aren't you? Yes.
Thank you so much. There is a question by Ismael Herrera Romero. Could you open up the mic for him, please? It is regarding institutionalization of social and cultural hierarchies, but let us ask him to ask you the question.
Well, it's kind of hard for me because it's such a hard word to pronounce, but yeah, just precisely that. What do you think about the relationship, about these complex relationships, cultural and socially speaking, and orality? Orality in this broad sense. I mean, is there any relationship? Is there any perpetuations of ideas through this orality? What do you think?
That's a big question, isn't it? I'm not sure. Oh, tell me first what you think, and then I'll reflect on it. I need to learn. Well, I mean, what I really, I'm sorry, go on.
Sorry, I'm going to activate his audio. Is it possible?
Oh,
No,
yes.
I can't. Oh, yeah.
Hi. Well, I don't know. It's such a complex thing. Well, I think maybe. Oh, esperen. Ahí está.
Oh, good. Oh.
Hello.
Like
well,
your cat.
Thanks. Again, I'm not sure. It's like, I think maybe there are some perpetuation of ideas or ideologies, maybe through this repetition and through this perdón, se me fue la palabra, como comunicación.
Dilo en español y lo traducimos.
Sí, o sea, solo es un término que se me fue en ambas lenguas. Transmission, the transmission of ideologies and ideas through this repetition of orality. I think that maybe it is quite possible for us to keep inside us some, I don't know, some preconceptions, you know? But I would love to hear you.
Well, good question. Couple of things. I don't know how direct they are. First, I think it is very good, I'm sure you do too, that museums now, rather than just having dead artifacts in cages behind glass that people don't touch, now go in for lots of audio-visual, in other words, dynamics and interactive, making that side important as well. The other thing I think is that a lot of people don't go to museums or archives or folklore collections. I see you have a collection of stuff there above your wardrobe. But all the same, you use the word ideology. I think we are now more aware, even not going into museums, that that life is complex and multimodal, and that our inheritance, our culture, is multimodal. And I think we're beginning to value that. And I hope I see a move in the school curricula as well. That it used to be you studied written texts as if they were the reality. And they are important, of course. I mean, I read and reread Shakespeare and plays and the sonnets, Shakespeare sonnets. I would like to have read one of those. And Jane Austen again and again. I'm in the middle of Emma again. I don't know if you know that. But it's only very recently that students would also study film or audiobooks. But now, I don't know about everywhere in the world. Maybe Spanish-speaking places were before English-speaking, because England can be pretty conservative. But I think that's a very, very good move. And also encouraging students to be multilingual, because if you're multilingual, you can't help listening. I learned more about French, I'm a very bad French speaker, by listening to French people saying, "Oh la la la, la la, oh la la." I realized you could say everything by those two sounds. So I think maybe we are now more aware of sounds, and long may that continue. I'm glad to see you nodding. Any thoughts, further thoughts from you in English or in French or in Spanish or Esperanto?
Well, yeah, it's just great to think about this expansion, you know, this, I don't know. Thank you so much for the answer.
Thank you, great.
We have a question by Andres Grumman, who doesn't want to take the mic. He says that his bilingual aptitudes are not as good as he would want them to be. I think he makes the point in English perfectly. I'm going to read what he said on the chat. There is a quite popular conception that defines the appearance of the sound of the voice as a ghost. It seems to me that you, Ruth, distance yourself from this conception by defining already at the beginning of this presentation that sound is not relegated to sight. He would like to know more about what you think about this.
The idea of a ghost. Well, I actually rather like that. I hadn't thought of it. In a way, all through our lives, we're more than one person. There's another eternal person going alongside us. I hadn't thought before, but maybe that is a sound, a sonic person. I'm not sure what else I can really say about that, except thank you for that conception.
Thank you very much. There is another question from Luis Aros. He says, would you like Luis to ask you directly to Ruth?
Oh, yeah. I can't help smiling because you're all so lovely.
Hola, Ruth. Hello. I'm Luis from Chile, so I'm going to say my question first in Spanish and then in English. Si podemos pensar la voz como, no como una materia del sonido y no como del lenguaje, como la interconexión de las sociedades, ¿verdad? Como la principal conjunción de la relación de los sujetos. O sea, en otras palabras, si podemos cambiar el eje de la visualidad, desde donde se han construido las principales sociedades occidentales, hacia otro que tenga que ver con un vector sónico, ¿no? Como pensar que la voz es la comunión o el comunitas. So according to your presentation, so I'm interested if you can say, can we think that voice, you know, as a matter of sound and not as a language, or not like as logos, you know, like phone, it could be the interconnection of societies and the main junction of the subject relationship. So in other words, can we change the axe of visuality from where most of societies have built from a sonic vector?
That's difficult. I hope I've got it right. But I was interested to see your gestures and your voice and your smile, all your face, all and your eyes, all interacting. There is something about sound which is international and internationally understood, and music as well. I mean, I know we all have different preconceptions, and, you know, for a while rock music or jazz were thought to be just noise, not music. But still there is something about music and sound. And if I stretch out, oh, I see, yes, it is visual as well. Stretch out my hand and smile and say, hi, or hola, or whatever it is, that is understood. It is international. I don't know if you've seen that wonderful film called The Mission. It's the music in that communicates. This was a Jesuit missionary. It was absolutely true, though the film elaborated it a bit, who went somewhere in South America with his oboe, and they were said to be cannibalistic, man-eating, horrible tribe. And he just sat there silently and played his oboe. And that just, well, it all ended tragically, but that somehow communicated. There was most wonderful music by Morricone called Gabriel's Oboe. Da, da, da. Some of you may know it. And that communicates to all of us now, across the century, across the cultures. And it's not quite relevant, but can I just say that I love the comment right at the very start. Sorry, this isn't relevant at all, really. To Erasmus of Rotterdam, Erasmus Desiderius. He's one of my great heroes for his great scholarship, because he brought back Greek sound in his great collection of proverbs. And he also was really one of the people who started peace studies. And so I've collected up what he said in an anthology I've written, which maybe I can tell you all about sometime. But thank you very much. Music can be an obstacle. It can get in the way, but it can communicate across cultures. I think of some blind singers in the north of Sierra Leone who used to sing of the miseries and the hardship of life with great smiles. And the sound communicated. At the north of Sierra Leone, there are about 8 different languages there. It communicated across those languages. Now, I'm not sure, sir, that I answered your question, so do come back.
Mariana?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Ruth, I was wondering, did you know John Miles Foley? Did you talk with him? Because you have some theoretical things in common, and I think when I met him, I was thinking about your work also, and I was so, I wanted to ask.
Well, shall I tell you? It's quite intimate, really. I have a complex and wonderful relation with him. Now, the first time I met him was at my very this will be a long story. My very first international conference was I was just a little girl, and Albert Lord was the big guru, and John Miles Foley was his postdoctoral student and his fan and his worshipper. And I didn't realize at that time that really you had to go along with Albert Lord or you were nobody. But because I was just a little girl from England and had learned in my classical studies that you should always be critical, I was, well, very positive and constructive, but quite critical of some of his assumptions that there was one thing universally called oral literature, and I got up and said that. And Albert Lord was very gracious, but his acolytes thought I was dreadful. And John Foley was, well, as you have to be as a postgraduate student, quite pushy. Well, the years rolled by and I wrote oral poetry, and it is the only review I've ever had that I thought was really unfair, because I like to have critical reviews, but he made me say things I didn't say because he was so worshipping Albert Lord. Because I was critical of some of Lord's, as I had been in that talk. I'm positively critical. But then later we met again, and I think I stayed in his house, and I remember his lovely wife made muffins for breakfast. I thought it was so brilliant. And he said, just quite quietly, he was a wonderful person. He was a pacifist too, I think. Sometimes loyalty leads one too far, which was a kind of apology. And we became deep friends. And I so admired, he founded this journal called Oral Tradition, which was really the first open access journal in the world. And he had people from everywhere, could have been any of you, writing for it. And he said he liked to employ as assistant editor students who had been to Vietnam. Now, he had refused the draft for moral reasons, but he said here were these people who were wounded, saw their best friends killed, and they came and served their country, and they came back and they were abhorred, and he wanted to help them. I was so sorry that I didn't see him the last time he came to Cambridge, but my husband was ill and I had to stay at home. But I had two amazing encounters for him. Talk of ghosts, I twice was him, sort of. Once he was meant to be the keynote speaker at a conference I went to, organized by the Spanish department in Belgrade. But he couldn't go, so I spoke instead. But the other most moving one was in Helsinki, when it was just after he died, and he was supposed to be the keynote speaker. And they asked me instead, which was incredibly moving and sad for me. So I felt, of course, I said, we can feel him around us. And I felt I was him in a way, transported at that moment. So he was, oh yes, and of course I learnt a lot, so much from him, and we agreed so much by the end. He was a person.
Wow.
Thank you very much. I appreciate so much that you tell us this story. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, we were wondering about that relation actually when we were discussing your work. There's one last question that we want to open the mic for, because we are very short of time. It is Gloria Chicote who could perhaps open up her mic and ask directly the question that she has asked in the chat. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I can see you.
Okay, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to meet everybody, and thank you very much, Ruth, for your presentation. It's a pleasure for me to meet you in this virtual way, in this virtual meeting. I'm in Argentina. I'm in Buenos Aires, and I'm talking to you from Buenos Aires. I like very much your presentation, and it's very interesting for me the idea of thinking the relationship between written and oral literature as a continuum, not with frontiers, with boundaries, but as an holistic conception of the literature, written and oral literature. So my question is, do you think that today literature is taught in this way at schools and universities? Do you think that scholars are teaching literature in this way or not? I think in Argentina it's not like that, but I don't know. What do you think about England or about the States? What happened? What do you think about it?
Well, I'm not sure about the States. Oh, lovely smile, and I wish my hair was as beautiful as yours. I think it varies. I think the newer universities are more go ahead. In fact, it's in the newer universities, the ones that used to be called polytechnics and looked down on in Britain, that the new things have come, like dance studies or folklore or astrophysics, the new things that used to be thought of as not part of the curriculum. I think in the older universities, well, I mean, there is a lot to be said for the written word. If you think of how classical literature came down over centuries and centuries, partly through the Arabs, but that we are right to look at the written word, and it is very beautiful too in its own way. But I do think we are gradually moving, particularly with audiobooks. Everybody wants audiobooks now, or the internet can be sonic as well as visual. So I think, but I would agree with you, let's hope that comes, but to keep the written as well. And of course there is that continuum and no opposition, but at each further end of the continuum, there are things that are mainly written, or the other end mainly sonic. And long may we keep with that complexity and with the complexity of all these wonderful student questions. And I look forward to more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, dear Ruth, it's Mariana again, but there is a student here in Morelia, there is a graduate, we create a career literature where students study literature, written and oral, in order to know better these two modes.
Yes.
I hope we will send you some some of our
please
things.
do.
And I think here there is another the National Oral Materials Laboratory that is really an special, an idea, a dream. And I think they will be in touch with you because they are really, Berenice and Santiago made really another dream comes true. But now they are asking also, do you know why your book is not translated to Spanish? Because really most of the people here wants to read you in Spanish also.
I don't know, you'll have to tell me. One of my other books, which does talk a lot about audition, communicating, is translated into Italian. So probably you all read that, but not the other. No, well, find a translator, please.
Okay.
And dreams. I think dreams are the stuff of life, the reality. So let us all share our dream together.
Thank you so much, Ruth. There are many people who have expressed their opinions and things throughout the chat. We're going to send them to you. Carmen Navijo, Isabel Alcántara, Pablo Morales, Flavia Montello, Paola Herrera. Thank you so much for participating. And thank you again, Ruth, for this wonderful chat that brought us close and brought us together. We're going to continue tomorrow, as you all know. Tomorrow we're going to to start at 10 o'clock again. The session is going to take place mainly in Spanish. For those of you who have asked why we don't have translations tomorrow, it's going to be rather in Spanish than in English, but we're going to translate in some things if you need to, of course. There are questions about your translations into Portuguese. There are things written in Portuguese by Ruth Finnegan. If you want, we can give you also some of this information. And I don't know, Ana Elena, would you like to close? Mariana, please.
Well, I would like to thank you, Ruth. Really, it's a dream come true for me, for my career, for my students, and well, thank you very much. And I think I would like to continue this talk. We hope in presential mode. And we love your work, and thank you very much for your wisdom and your warmth and your everything. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to add the same, that what a privilege it is to have such a legend with us today, and the way in which you make the screen come to life, which is what we need just now. No, it's no longer a cold screen. It is something filled with warmth and with joy, and we all appreciate that very, very much, and are very inspired by your words. And well, thank you everybody who has been here. Especially those of you who have been actively participating, and I encourage everyone else to do so. Perhaps tomorrow, when everything is in Spanish, you'll be more encouraged to do so.
And remember that you are all the legends of the future.
Oh, how lovely. Well, with that, we say goodbye. Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Ciao.
See you tomorrow. Thank you.